All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, thank you so much for joining us here today. This is the seventh session of our Reentry Month speaker series. We really appreciate you taking your time to come and join us here today for what is going to be an exciting and hopefully lively discussion. And so we invite you to use the Q&A function at any portion of time today to engage with our panelists. They're really looking forward to your questions here today. Again, this is our seventh session of our Reentry Month speaker series. The theme of the series is reentry in a COVID world, just lessons, looking back over the lessons that we've learned in the past year. I just want to thank the co-chairs of the Fairfax Reentry Council, without whom this wouldn't be possible, Leanne Hanna and Tia West. Thank you to our sponsors, VPPA, for their generous contribution to this event and making it possible. And thank you to our panelists who have generously taken of their time here today. We really appreciate it. So just a couple of quick housekeeping things before we get started. If you have any tech issues, please use the chat function. So it says it'll come to all panelists, but I will respond to you directly. So if you have any tech issues, please use the chat function there. If you have a question for our speakers, please place it in the Q&A section of the chat. There will be time for question and answers. They'll be monitoring it throughout the presentation to be able to answer your questions as they come up. So please, they're really looking forward to that. So please engage and ask as many questions as you want. That is what they are here for. Lastly, this is our 7th of 8 webinars for this month. And so our last one will be on Thursday at the same time at noon, from noon to 1:15. And so we hope you'll join us for the conclusion of our monthly series. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to McGennis Williams, as she is the moderator for this panel.
Thank you, Vince. Again, my name is McGennis Williams. I'm an attorney licensed in Virginia and DC. I was a criminal defense lawyer for 15 years, and presently I work pro bono for the Virginia Redemption Project. Bryan?
Hi, everyone. I'm Bryan Kennedy. I am a senior assistant public defender in Fairfax, where I do new attorney training and handle a docket of serious cases. Outside of those hours, I am also the policy director with Justice Forward Virginia. We're a group that does criminal legal system reform in the Commonwealth. Kelly.
Hi, my name's Kelly Pride. I am a returning citizen and a lifelong resident of the state of Virginia. In the past year, I've been reunited with my family, including my daughter, my mother and father and brother. I now work full-time and manage a retail company for a group of employees of 70.
The three of us are here today to talk about recent actions of the Virginia Assembly that are important to Virginia returning citizens. There are several topics that we want to cover, namely probation, bail, expungement, marijuana legalization, protections for people reporting drug overdose, changes in sex trafficking laws, and finally, changes in laws regarding court fines and fees and traffic violations. So first off, Bryan, we'd like to talk about changes to probation. Can you give us a recap of HB 2038?
Absolutely. This bill is going to drastically change how probation violations are handled in a few different ways. Obviously, no one who's a returning citizen or our loved ones who are going to end up in a probation violation again, but just in case they are, here's how it's going to change. The main change is how it deals with technical violations. So a lot of people think they have that definition. It's defined in the statute, but it's essentially things like not checking with your probation officer, missing a meeting, having a positive drug test, things like that. The standard rules of probation that you signed or your loved one signed when they were initially put on probation, that's essentially what we're talking about. If someone has a technical violation of probation and they come in and the judge wants to charge them with that, the first time you have a technical violation, the judge can't put you in jail. The judge can do other things, modify your conditions of probation, reprimand you, tell you not to do it again, but jail time is not a risk. The second time it happens, it's presumed that you don't go to jail, but the judge can put you in jail for up to 15 days. The third time it happens, you can be put in jail for the remainder of your backup time or prison. A few important caveats to that to make sure everyone's clear. Picking up a new charge or new conviction is not a technical violation. That means if you get a new conviction, you're subject to your entire backup time from the beginning. Violating a special condition is also not a technical violation, which means at your sentencing, if the judge said you can't be on the internet or you can't use drugs, a few things like that, the judge expressly said it at your sentencing and wrote it in the order, that is also not a technical violation. There's a few other things that are important changes what a good behavior violation is. But those are the main things to remember, that you're basically what the General Assembly is doing is saying, we're going to give people a chance. We're not going to be hyper technical about probation violations, and we're going to let people get on their feet knowing that reentry is a process and not something where we immediately need to be returning people to the penitentiary.
And Kelly, given your experience with the criminal legal system, how do these changes sound to you?
So really, it's like Bryan described. It's an opportunity to give us a second chance, coming out of jail, coming out of a program as a recovering addict, and a returning citizen. I mean, it does give us room. I don't want to say for error because I don't want to encourage bad behaviors, but let's say you do relapse and you fail a drug screen. Automatically, in the past, in my mind, I automatically ran from probation because I knew that I was going to go to jail as a result of testing positive. In this way, it gives me the confidence to confide in my probation officer that things are difficult and, that I did relapse without the fear of immediate punishment, immediate jail time. So that's what those changes in probation can mean to me personally as a returning citizen.
Thanks, Kelly. Bryan, there's been some changes to bail, correct?
Yeah, again, no one's ever going to have to worry about this, but there are some changes to bail proceedings. So as of right now, until July 1st, and basically since the early 90s in Virginia, if you were charged with a crime and it was on a list of, they were called presumptions against bail offenses, then instead of the government convincing a judge that why you should be held before your trial, it was on the accused person to convince the judge why they should be released before trial. So it really changed the starting point for a bail hearing. And it made it really difficult, if not impossible, for people to get bail when they were charged with anything that was alleged to be violent. And that was just coming out of the magistrate. That was regardless of what the actual facts of the case were, or if you were on probation, or if you had another pending charge. All of those, among other things, like in addition to being an undocumented immigrant, all of those things could end up having you held before trial because the standard was so difficult to meet. So as of July 1st, that's going away. Now, after July 1st, every single charge that comes in, it's on the Commonwealth's attorney to convince the judge that the person is either an unreasonable risk of danger to themselves, a family or household member, or to others, or that they are a risk to, or that they won't come to court, basically, which really should mean that they'll abscond, but it basically means they won't show up to court. So it resets basically back to where we were, what the Constitution intends, what everyone should be, which is that if the government wants to put you in jail before you're found guilty, they have to do the work to convince a judge to show why that should be.
How does that sound to you, Kelly?
It sounds like a great alternative to incarceration. I feel like it's going to allow people to possibly enter programs on bond, and consider that as a form of alternative sentencing down the road if they are found guilty of the crime. It eliminates a lot of problems that occur when you are incarcerated for a period of time. And that's just what I think. To me, I know that in the past it's been, an uphill battle for myself to get out on bond. I've had to have numerous bond hearings, appealing all the way to high court. So it's eliminating a lot of headache, I think, for lawyers and for those who are incarcerated before they're convicted of the crime.
Thanks, Kelly. So there's some significant changes in sealing criminal records, right, Bryan?
Yeah, and this one I want to take a little bit longer to talk about because it's incredibly complicated, and it's a huge change. It's not the change we need, but it's an important step. So a lot of people refer to it as expungement. Expungement means basically getting something off your record and it's gone forever and no one can access it. This bill is more about sealing. Sealing means that it's hidden from most people on your criminal record, but some people can still access it. So there's a little bit of expungement in this bill, a little bit of sealing, and I'll try to explain the differences as I go through it. So first of all, there's two different procedures. One is automatic, one is petition-based. So anyone who's tried to do this now knows in Virginia, basically, if you were found not guilty of a crime, or under certain circumstances, if a charge was null prost or dismissed, you can go to a judge and ask them, a circuit court judge, and ask them to expunge that off your record. That is a laborious process. It can be difficult without a lawyer. It can be confusing about who is eligible. And really, it's allowing people to do something that should be a no-brainer, right? You weren't found guilty of something. Why would it stay on your record? What now is going to happen is a lot of those, so the ones that were found not guilty or null prost, are going to be automatically expunged, and they can be expunged even by the judge right when the null prost happens. So when null prost is entered, the judge can expunge it right there on the same paperwork. Same thing with not guilty. So that'll be a huge change to save people having to come back to court maybe a couple times later on when it affects them, when that good thing happens to them in court. There are also going to be misdemeanors. I think there's 9 charges total. It's low-level misdemeanor offenses that if you get charged with something like a trespass, you're convicted, and then you have 7 years go by with no other charges, no convictions, it'll be automatically expunged off your record, which means you don't have to do anything. There's just going to be a computer system they set up that will just automatically delete it. And that's not expungement, that's sealing. So it'll be sealed automatically after 7 years. That's underage possession of alcohol, petty larceny, first offense, disorderly conduct, trespassing, and then marijuana we'll talk about later. It's also going to allow a petition-based process, which means you have to go and talk to a judge. It won't happen automatically for other misdemeanors, some other misdemeanors, and some felony offenses. And that would require that you have 10 years between when you were convicted and when you ask to have it expunged of having no issues for convictions. So that's a huge change. Right now, no convictions are eligible for expungement. So that's a massive, massive difference in what the law will be. It is a long time. 10 years is a long time, but it's relatively consistent with what other states are starting to do in this area. I should say that some charges are never going to be eligible for sealing or expungement. Those are things that basically they're called recidivist offenses. So things that the charge will say a third or a subsequent or a second. So like driving under the influence is never going to be eligible for expungement because when you have too many of them, it gets to be a felony. Same with domestic assault and battery. That's always going to be on your record. Vincent is asking a very good question, which is when these laws are going to come into effect. So right now, the bill says at the outside date, it's 2024 or January 1st, 2025, basically because the computer systems of courts across the Commonwealth are so old and terrible. Some of them are still running on MS-DOS that they need several years to pay for and upgrade all those systems so that the automatic part of the sealing and expungement bill can happen. So right now the clock is running. So if you have something that happened and you are in this 7-year or 10-year area, this is going to count. It's not like the clock's going to start in 2024 or 2025, but it is going to take till at least then, and then they'll look backwards at those things. Someone else asked if you had a null pros charge in 2015, can you get that charge expunged? The answer to that is yes, you can do that right now under most circumstances, doing a petition-based expungement. And I should point out, if you think you qualify financially, the Legal Services of Northern Virginia has a pro bono project right now that can match you with a lawyer if you financially qualify. But you can also do it yourself. If you think you can go to the Circuit Court of Fairfax County's website. If you just Google Fairfax expungement, it'll come up with all the paperwork and the steps you need to do right now, which will allow you to start that expungement process. And Justine is asking, the 7 to 10 years, how does it apply for more than one eligible misdemeanor? So one of the last things I need to say, and thank you for bringing this up, is the bill allows basically for 2 convictions to be petition-based expunged. So you only get 2 opportunities to do this. So if you have more than 2 on your record, it's not going to be possible. I don't know how they're going to count which ones. Will it start with felonies? Will it start with misdemeanors? Will it be the 2 most recent ones? Will it be the 2 oldest ones? I don't know how all of that's going to work. Or even if, different eligibility, it's going to be interesting to see how it all works when it plays out. But it's not going to be something that's going to let people, even if you had a lot of charges 20 years ago, and it's been 20 years, it's not going to allow you to get everything sealed. I think the last thing to say about sealing is, like I said, that means some people can access your records. So while most private employers will not be able to see that on your criminal record, most government employers will be able to see it. And then some private employers, people who are engaged in things like childcare or other reasons where they may need to do a more detailed background check, law enforcement, security guard, they're going to be able to look past the sealing and see your whole record, whether it was sealed or not. And the same goes for the federal government. Even now, if you have something expunged, like, and that was null pros, you were found not guilty, you still need to disclose that to the federal government because they're going to be able to see it anyway. And I keep saying this, but the last thing I will say before we go to Kelly is, if you are a non-citizen, someone who is not a citizen of the United States, you do need to be careful about this. When you apply for immigration benefit or when you have to defend yourself in an immigration hearing, the immigration courts do not care about state expungement and sealing. So the best practice there for you is to get a copy of whatever it was, a certified copy, or I tell people get 5 or 6, store them in different places to make sure they're safe, so that you have proof of whatever happened, because unfortunately our Supreme Court of the United States says it's on you to prove that you're eligible for the benefit. So it's on you to prove that charge was null pros, or you were found not guilty, or you were found guilty of something else. So act like you're going to have to prove that in immigration court someday.
Kelly, how does it sound to you, particularly the weight?
Right. So that's really, it's a small step in the right direction. I feel like, a lot of times when we are prosecuted, we're so fearful because Virginia is so antiquated in a lot of its laws. So really it's a small victory in the greater war. For someone like me who has a list of felonies, as long as I am tall, overall right now, the law is not going to positively affect me greatly, but it is a step in the right direction. So, really all this says to me is to really support those state officials, really support the organizations that are lobbying for more changes in the law. The length that you have to wait, it seems so long in retrospect, but the longer that we continue to do the right things as returning citizens, the more the laws are going to change to benefit us. So
to both of you, Bryan, I'll go back to you for a moment. There are a number of organizations that returning citizens can become part of and testify in front of the General Assembly, aren't there?
There are, and the number's really growing every day, of groups of returning citizens or work for returning citizens to basically amplify their voices, to make sure that people understand they're people too, and they're citizens too, and we need to listen to them. And I think especially over the past year and a half, down in Richmond during the General Assembly sessions, it's been incredibly powerful testimony from people who are directly impacted by the criminal legal system that's moved a lot of these legislators, because they're actually hearing from people for the first time. There were hearings on reinstating parole, on a lot of these bills, where if it weren't for, it's one thing for someone like me to go down there and say, well, this is the law, and you should change it. It's not fair. Here are a bunch of statistics that no one cares about. But when someone like Kelly, when you're talking today, or a lot of other people I've met over the past several years, can come and say, here's how it's affecting my life. And I'm a real person, and I have family, and I have feelings, and I'm trying to do the right thing, and here's what's going on, that it can be really impactful. And it was true with the expungement bill. I'll plug Justice Forward Virginia. We're always looking for people. We have lobby days. We have meetings with legislators. There's lots of other people around the state doing this work. McGennis put some of them in the chat. But sign up if someone's online or on Twitter saying something you're interested in. Hey, we're working on this bill. Send them a message, because we're always looking for people who can help us tell the stories that these legislators need to hear.
And Kelly, I've heard you speak in a number of places about your experience as a returning citizen. And I can absolutely see you talking to the General Assembly. And what's it been like for you to speak publicly and to be able to use your experience in a super positive way?
It's very empowering. It actually, working with you, working with a college professor, I speak to their college students. Really, it's a sense of accountability for me. It keeps me focused. It gives me drive. It allows me Like I said, mostly it's the accountability. Like it contributes to my recovery and my sobriety, because I don't want to say I have something greater to answer to, but in a way I do. In a way, there's responsibility now that I'm putting on myself to make changes for others. And in turn, that's changing the way that I handle situations. It's changing the way that I live. So that's really, it's just accountability. It's a purpose. Everyone needs a purpose in life. And a lot of times as addicts, we kind of lose our place, we lose our drive, and kind of get stuck. So it really gives a greater meaning.
And I just put my email in the chat box for everyone. If anybody wants to join Kelly and other people who are willing to talk to Congress people about changing the laws, we absolutely welcome you very much. And if you will contact me, I will get you in touch with people, organizations where you can be very, very helpful. We really need your help. So Bryan, do you want to move on to marijuana legalization?
Sure. This is another one where the devil is really in the details about this, and everyone, whether you're on probation or parole or post-release supervision or you are not, needs to be careful about what you hear from other people and what that actually means you can do. So this will be, again, a little bit of a longer explanation. So for most people who are over the age of 21, you're going to be able to possess some marijuana up to an ounce, and you're going to be able to grow marijuana under certain circumstances as of July 1st. That is good. It's not decriminalized, it's legalized. You can have it, you can smoke it, you can do whatever you want with it, but there's lots of caveats to that. And a lot of them are really important because there's still some crimes that are going to relate to marijuana. There's still some times where it's going to be illegal, if not criminal, and eventually it will become criminal. So to start with, if you are under 21, whether you're over 18 or not, you cannot possess marijuana on July 1st, rather. It is still illegal for you to do that. The first couple times you're going to be paying a fine and probably having mandatory treatment for marijuana. That's right, mandatory drug treatment for marijuana. It's going to be a great use of our resources, but that's what's going to happen. And then if you don't follow a judge's order, you can end up in jail. So you need to be very careful about that. So if you're under 21, just stay away from it. It's not worth it. If you are driving a car and you're transporting your marijuana, put it in the trunk. If it is in the passenger compartment of your car, it can lead to an inference that you're smoking or using marijuana while you're driving, and that's a misdemeanor. So stay away from that. So the big takeaway is if you're bringing it from one place to another, put it ideally in a sealed container, ideally in a backpack that's zipped up in your trunk. Even though it's legal, that's what you have to do. Don't put it in the glove box. Don't put it in the console. Don't put it in your pocket. Don't put it in a backpack in the back seat. Put it in the trunk. You can't possess marijuana on school grounds. So if you're going to pick up your kid, can't be in your car at all. Can't be in your pocket. Can't be in your purse. Be careful about that. That's a misdemeanor. Then there is growing it. You can grow it up to 4 plants per household, not per person. If you're living in a house with more people, everyone's got to share. Only 4 per household. That means 2 mature plants, 2 immature plants. You have to mark each plant, put a tag on them with your name and your driver's license number. They can't be visible from the street, and they have to be kept out of a place where someone under 21 could access them. So I don't know if anyone's been out to Oregon or Colorado or places that don't have these exact rules. You can just have a bush in your front yard. You can have a bush in your backyard, and it's fine. That is not what's going to happen in Virginia. All right. Ideally, if it were me, to be completely safe, I'd be doing something hydroponic in my closet, in my basement, under lights, whatever it is. That's where you're going to be safest. Having it outside in your yard, especially if you don't have a fence, if you don't have a high fence, if you have kids in the neighborhood, could really lead you to get in trouble. In terms of giving it to people, you're going to be able to give people small amounts of marijuana, again, under an ounce, but give means give, not sell. So I can give my friends or whoever, strangers on the street, if they want it, small amounts of marijuana. That's totally fine. You can't get anything in return for that. not money, not goods, not services. Can't do that. If anyone's familiar in DC, they had a nice little situation where you can't sell marijuana, but if I buy a t-shirt, it could come with a few grams, right? That would be fine. Can't do that in Virginia either. You can't do this kind of buy one thing and wink, wink, get marijuana on the side. I'm not paying for the marijuana. And if any of you are asking, where can I buy seeds to start my marijuana growing situation on July 1st, there is nowhere you can legally purchase seeds in Virginia, even after July 1st. So everyone's going to be hoping that police don't want to spend their time doing this, which I don't think they will. But just be careful with that. And especially be careful with that if you're on some type of supervision, pretrial or post-conviction supervision. It's really unclear how this is all going to work. Jenny, I think I'm pronouncing your name right. Sorry if I'm not. In terms of recovering addict, I'm going to let Kelly talk about that, because I think there's a lot of questions. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something, but I'm just telling you what the law is right now. If you're on supervision, it's not clear how everyone's going to deal with this. When it was legalized in DC, a lot of judges in Virginia were saying, well, you can't use marijuana anywhere. Some were saying you can't use it even if it's legal. Some were saying you can't use it unless it's legal. It became a little complicated. Now that it's legal here, your standard conditions of probation say you can't use an illegal drug, which it won't be as long as you're over 21, and you can't use alcohol to excess, which means it's impacting your daily life or your job, things like that. I don't know what the Department of Corrections is going to do. I imagine they'll say you can't use marijuana to excess, which means you can't use it so it's impacting your life. So be careful with that, especially if you are in recovery or you do have an addiction. But that's a lot of stuff. So if you sell marijuana, that's still a crime. If you possess more than a pound of marijuana, that's also going to end you up in the penitentiary potentially. And eventually you're going to be able to buy marijuana at retail stores. They still have to vote on that again. So it will depend on the next few elections. So that will be another interesting thing, but that won't happen until probably 2024 at the earliest. The last thing for people who do have criminal records that have marijuana convictions on them, simple possession of marijuana and marijuana distribution misdemeanors will be expunged. Those won't count towards those two I was talking about in the expungement bill. Felony marijuana distribution or possession with intent to distribute cases will be petition-based expungement. That means you can go to a judge and ask for that to be expunged. As long as you weren't selling to a kid or you weren't a kingpin, which is almost known in Virginia. So don't worry, that probably does not apply to you unless you were selling hundreds of pounds of marijuana. There are also going to be opportunities eventually for people to participate in marijuana businesses. There will be special consideration for people who lived in areas that were over-policed or had marijuana records. It's going to be a little complicated. So if you're interested in eventually getting into the marijuana business in the next few years, look for more advice on that. In the next few months, there should be lots of information from people like Justice Ford, but also especially organizations like Marijuana Justice, Rise for Youth, and the ACLU of Virginia. There's going to be a public information campaign to try to highlight all these issues to make sure people are on the right side of the law as it continues.
Right. So Jenny, I want to kind of answer your question from a returning citizen and a recovering addict's point of view. All of these changes in the marijuana law sound complicated and dangerous to me. From a criminal standpoint, I feel like anything that brings attention to me is just not good. I just, I don't want to be under the eye of the law in any way. I don't want police to scrutinize whether I'm growing my hydroponics correctly or not. So I certainly am not going to personally push the limits with probation or the judges to smoke marijuana, especially while on probation. So from an addict's point of view, a drug is a drug is a drug is a drug. I've never personally had problems with alcohol or marijuana, but anything that can lower my inhibitions in any way is going to quickly progress me in the direction of cocaine again. So I'm just erring on the side of caution, and I'm seeing all of the red lights that are flashing in front of my eyes, and I am I'm just avoiding marijuana, alcohol, anything that can potentially lead me down the path to addiction again.
Bryan, do any of these, the marijuana changes in marijuana laws, you were saying that some can be automatically expunged. Do any of them contribute to any kind of mandatory minimum right now?
I think for felony marijuana distribution, there's eventually a mandatory minimum, and there can be a mandatory minimum with a gun. I have to double check, but those laws will be changing. Generally, don't have a gun if you have more than a pound of marijuana at the same time. Don't do that. And in some parts of the state, it probably will change, but the felony marijuana laws are all basically changing. So you really have to have more than a pound for it to be a problem. So definitely, no matter how much you're growing, keep it under a pound in your house or wherever you are. Under a pound will be a $25 fine for your first 2 times. Over a pound will be a felony. There's not going to be a misdemeanor level possession with intent to distribute anymore, basically. The last thing I should say for people, under Keenan, it is confusing. Under an ounce is legal, 100% legal. Under an ounce to a pound is illegal, but not criminal for your first 2 times. So you end up with a $25 fine. Again, probably just better to keep it under an ounce and not have to worry about it. But, again, you can give away an ounce for free. So if you get over an ounce, your plants are doing really well, give it to other people. Be a good friend. The last thing I'll say is, in terms of probation, if your probation officer tells you after July 1st, you can't smoke marijuana, full stop, and you think that's unreasonable based off the crime you were committed of. So those people who have serious addiction problems, it's going to be a tougher sell. But if you had a larceny that had nothing to do with that, a robbery from 10 years ago, you're still on probation for something stupid, and you think that your probation is being unreasonable, reach out to your lawyer, or you can file a motion with the judge and try to ask for a lawyer, because the judge can determine whether something is reasonable or unreasonable, and it's up to them, not your probation officer. But probably more is going to come from the Department of Corrections as we go.
Kelly, did you want to say any more about this particular topic?
No, I don't. I think Jenny's question provoked the basic response that I was going to have. It's all great for anyone who doesn't have, an addiction or anything like that. But just as it's applicable to me, I just, I'm going to stay away from the marijuana and the marijuana laws.
Okay. So one of the changes that actually is really good has to do with when people are a witness to an overdose. Bryan, do you want to talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, and this is something that has really expanded over the past few years. The Atwood Foundation, particularly in Fairfax, has done a lot of work on this. So basically what it came down to, and Kelly, I'm sure we'll talk more about this, is that if someone was overdosing, especially with the amount of opiates that have been around for the past decade or so, then everyone was afraid to call the police when their friend or someone they were with was overdosing, because they were afraid of getting a felony for possessing drugs, or for giving that person drugs, getting a distribution felony. So a few years ago, they expanded this to basically say it's called the safe harbor, where if someone was experiencing an overdose and they reached out for help, they wouldn't be prosecuted. That's not how a lot of us read the bill, but that's unfortunately how the Court of Appeals of Virginia read the bill, that you had to be the person experiencing the overdose. You had to call, and as long as you called, you wouldn't be prosecuted. That's not super helpful, depending what stage of the overdose you're in. It is about as narrow of a bill as it possibly could get. So luckily this past year, a lot of advocates basically said, let's expand this to be what it actually should be, which is someone I am with is experiencing an overdose. I call the police. I stay and help out, make sure they know everything that's going on, help out the ambulance, the police. I'm cooperative, then I won't be prosecuted. So that's where we are now, which everyone should know that, and it's a complete defense, which means not guilty, not like a misdemeanor or deferred disposition. If you do that, it's a not guilty. Because what we want to do is encourage people to help others when they see someone in medical distress, even if it means exposing that they're using an illegal drug. So I think the takeaway for this for everybody is, whether it's you're using opiates with that person, you're telling that person not to use opiates and they're in your house, they're in your car, whatever it is, don't be afraid to get that person help as soon as possible. Because that's what the General Assembly is saying they're trying to encourage, and that's what Commonwealth attorneys should be doing as well.
Right. Bryan, did that law already take effect, or is that one that's going into effect July 1st?
That's the 2021 session, so July 1st.
Okay.
There was an expansion of it that went into effect last July, and then this July it's going to be the broader version.
Right. So yeah, unfortunately, the opiate epidemic is huge. It's insane. I know that I've personally lost friends and family. I know that years ago, my best friend, she did federal penitentiary time for someone overdosing in her house. I think back then she was charged with, I want to say, not attempted murder, something along those lines, just an insane charge because someone overdosed in her house. So really it is important. I think that's the best thing, that can prevent losing lives other than, outright being able to get all the opiates off the streets. But I can tell you this, that's why I was asking about when the law went into effect, because unfortunately, someone that I know recently overdosed and he lived, thank goodness. But fortunately, he wasn't charged with possession or, anything like that for the heroin. So that's great. That's why I was wondering when the law went into effect, or if, it was something they were sending to the lab and waiting, to bring the charge down later. But really, it is something I know that people in the past have, if someone overdosed in their car, if someone overdosed in their house, they literally dragged the body out onto the streets, and hopefully a non-user called the police to save the person. So it really is, it's a huge difference in the change of the laws. And I think that it's great. So it really is about saving lives and not punishing people, so.
Yeah, and I think just a couple of technical things on that. The law is a little specific, so you do have to stay in the spot where the overdose happened. So don't bring someone outside, don't drive to someone else's house, stay there with the person. You have to help, which I think everyone's doing, and you have to stay there if you call. So you can't call and then leave. You got to stay there, because if you leave, you can't take advantage of the law. And since you're not going to have to worry about it, you can tell them your name and what happened and just be straight with them, because as long as you do that, you're not going to have to worry about it.
Good, thanks. Ryan, there's some changes in the sex trafficking laws, right?
Yeah, and these, there's two sides of this coin, both from this past year, which are both fairly interesting. So one is if you are currently the victim of sex trafficking, which is defined in the statute, but it's defined in a way that everyone knows what that means. And you commit certain offenses and you're charged with them, it can be a complete defense to that charge that you were the victim of sex trafficking. So it's mostly things like prostitution and body house, things like that. The important thing here is if you are or someone who is the victim of sex trafficking and they are charged with one of these types of crimes, or really any crime, it can be really difficult, having worked with people in various capacities who were the victims of sex trafficking. It can be very difficult for those people to tell a lawyer about it, especially a lawyer who they think won't understand or maybe isn't getting it. So encourage them to be explicit with their lawyer, explain what's going on, whether they're going to say it's sex trafficking or not. If you know it's sex trafficking, it sounds like it, tell them to tell their lawyer about it, because it can be a defense to several charges. And if it's not a defense under the statute, it can be something that is incredibly helpful to explain the context of what's going on and use that in other ways in other parts of these new laws. The other side of this is if you have been convicted of a crime, like prostitution or body house, there's a few others, but it's things like that. And what happened during that time when you were convicted was that you were the victim of sex trafficking. So this is something that happened in the past. You can get what's called a writ of vacator, but basically it's kind of like an expungement, but basically it's like a way to say, I was a victim of sex trafficking, so this should be wiped off my record, and like it never happened. And that's basically what this would allow you to do. It's probably worth, if you're thinking about yourself or a loved one that was in that situation, reaching out to a lawyer. I can't give you a list right now, but I'm sure there's going to be lots of lawyers who would be willing to do this and do this work pro bono for people who have legitimate claims of sex trafficking. So there's going to be lots of groups to reach out. A lot of the groups who work with sexual assault victims. The Tahiri Justice Center in Northern Virginia jumps out of my mind if it's an immigrant person, but lots of other organizations as well. But if that applies for you, it can be an important step to try to get some things off your record, if not all of them, depending what happened. So a really important change in the law that's giving us a small ability to look back at what happened in the past and make that situation better.
Right. I think that it's great as well. I think that it's a sign that the world is really opening its eyes to some of these things that have been going on for decades and centuries. I work with the Virginia Beach Justice Initiative, which helps victims of human trafficking. So even in a lot of the situations where the charges aren't necessarily related to prostitution or sex trafficking, this organization and other organizations like it are able to find alternative sentencing methods for victims who are charged with crimes. That really, it all goes hand in hand. You can't say that, there's no drugs in sex trafficking. I hope that eventually the laws expand to cover some drug charges. A lot of the times that's how women and men are entrapped in the sex trafficking game. So I hope, just like I said before, it's all about campaigning for these changes and bringing in awareness to the underlying issues. It's not necessarily the problem that the person is a criminal or makes these bad decisions. We're influenced by others. So I think it's great. I think it's great that awareness is out there now, but the changes in society are really bringing changes in the laws.
Thanks, Kelly. Bryan, what was was it the Virginia Poverty Center? What was the
Or the Tahiri Justice Center? I will try to put that in the chat. They work with non-citizens.
Okay.
But there's other organizations that may also, I'm sure, also do this type of work. So, but reach out. I'm sure, again, if legal services may be able to point you in that.
Right. Again,
well, other people.
Sure. If you reach out to me, I'll find someone that can answer your question. Thanks for doing that, Bryan. So there's also a number of traffic related things, habitual offender being one.
Yes. So if you are someone who is declared a habitual offender, we haven't done that in a long time, but back in the 90s, especially, they were making every single human being who possibly could into the early aughts a habitual offender. Some of that was for DUIs, some of it was for driving unsuspended, just because people were poor. Shows how far we've come. But if you were adjudicated a habitual offender, that all those laws are going away. So if that's something you think is still on your driving record, I would encourage you after July 1st, or maybe a few weeks after that, to go to the DMV and get a compliance summary. That's what you can ask for. It'll show you everything you need to do to get your license back. But the habitual offender part of the restoration should go away. And then there's probably other things you may need to do at this point, at least pay a reinstatement fee. But there is going to be a path back that's a lot less complicated than it used to be to get someone who was declared a habitual offender back to being able to drive, if that's something that they want to do. There's also, for anyone, this was last year, a year ago, July, anyone who is suspended because they couldn't pay court costs and fines, that's not happening anymore either. So all of those suspensions were considered completed. So if you think your license is suspended only because you did not pay court costs and fines, that's not true anymore. Again, I would recommend going to the DMV. They also have this ability online, if you know your customer number, to get a compliance summary, which will again show you everything you need to do. If there were other suspensions on your record, like drug-related suspensions, things like that, those may still be there that have to run, but the timeline of those is different. Vincent's question is an interesting one. We certainly have some people who are currently charged with habitual offender charges. So what will happen on those of July 1st? Technically, the legal answer is nothing. They can still technically be convicted of that because of what the law was before July 1st. But certainly, I think the progressive, forward-looking thing would be that if one were charged with a crime and that crime was declared no longer a crime anymore, that the prosecutor wouldn't prosecute that. So hopefully that will be the case, but certainly it gives they should get a lawyer, because a habitual offender is always looking at jail time, or they were, and their lawyer should be able to argue that it's just nonsense to continue prosecuting them for that charge. There's other things, can't promise that. Let's see, there were also a lot of changes to when someone's license is going to be suspended for drug offenses or non-drug offenses, especially non-driving related offenses. So it's really worth looking into. If you think your license is suspended, it's probably a good time at some point to go check to see why, and following up with your lawyer about that, because we used to suspend people's licenses for literally any reason that we could find, and now that's going to really be changing.
Right. That's something I'm dealing with the DMV and the courts now for a suspended license based on drug charges. I've actually made strides. And so now I'm operating under a restricted license, but it is, I mean, it's an expensive and it's an expensive process, and it's an uphill battle. Really, it is. It seems like there's a lot of loss in communication between the DMV and the courts, so it's great that changes are being made. Just, make sure you get, your compliance summary, make sure you get the information that you need so that everybody's on the same page. That's all I can say. It's terrible when your license is suspended because it's hard to get it back. It's a process.
Bryan, was there anything more on traffic? Because I want to circle back and have some more questions about stuff we talked about earlier.
Vincent asks, is it difficult to work with the DMV since the pandemic? Yes, is the answer for everybody.
For sure.
Hopefully, as of Friday, I guess, right? No more social distancing restrictions, apparently. So the DMV hopefully will be opening up to more appointments, but at least for the past year, it's been, for my clients, incredibly difficult, because it's been like even not my clients, people I know, right? You can get a renewal appointment, but you have to drive to Stafford to get it, which if you don't have a car, because your license is suspended, makes it basically impossible.
Yeah.
And the Fairfax license appointments and things like that have been really impossible. They have expanded their online offerings, the DMV, in the past year, so worth checking out. Google Virginia DMV. Online services is one of the tabs on the top. Check there, because they are slightly different than they used to be. But again, hopefully as of next week, it should be a lot easier to go and get an appointment to get things done.
Bryan, I had a question from something we were talking about a while back. Interested in Kelly's feedback on this too, that you were saying that there are some offenses that would never be expunged because they are part of the mandatory minimum thing. The horror of mandatory minimums. I know there's been some work toward, and certainly Families Against Mandatory Minimums would be a great place for everybody in the audience, if you're interested, to volunteer to work with them. But can you talk a little bit about mandatory minimums and what could be on the horizon if we work hard enough?
Yes, we came so close to getting mandatory minimums taken care of in Virginia. Quite literally, the last hour the General Assembly was in session, this was still a fight. The fight boiled down to the House of Delegates thinking they should get rid of mandatory minimums for drug-related offenses and some other nonviolent charges, and the Senate of Virginia doing what I think makes the most policy sense, which is that no mandatory minimums work, and just getting rid of all mandatory minimums. The background of this, people think, especially those of us who lived through the late 80s and early 90s, have it ingrained to us that mandatory minimums, stop crime, and 30 years of research has shown that's absolutely not true, which I think probably makes a lot of sense to people here, because no one's looking through the, pulling out the thin code of Virginia here and looking through that before they decide to make a decision, because that's not how people end up committing crimes. It's just not at all what happens. So they don't have any deterrent effect, and they really just mean that people are coerced into plea bargaining to get around them, and people end up taking pleas for a lot longer in jail or prison than they should have, and it makes them not go to trial. So a lot of people understand that. There's some political issues that surrounded it as well, but it's going to be back up next year. And especially if you or a loved one were coerced into taking a plea because of a mandatory minimum, or you have a loved one who's serving a mandatory minimum and they've drastically changed since they were sentenced, which is almost everybody, because that's also what we know about people who go to prison. We really need your voices, especially with the House of Delegates, to show them that all mandatory minimums are stupid and should go away. And I'm going to put out a special plug for many, many people, especially women who are involved in the criminal legal system. Statistically, many people have trauma. That's how women end up in the criminal legal system for the most part. And there's a special need, especially for some people in Fairfax, to hear from women who were themselves the victims of sexual trauma or other types of trauma and abuse about why mandatory minimums don't make sense, and we should be letting people have discretion over what sentences should be based off the individual case, not based off the charge. So if that's something you agree with, FAM is still working on this. Justice Ford is working on it. A lot of other organizations are. So please, please reach out, because we need real human voices on this, because the statistics didn't work this year. The science didn't work, so we're going to need stories. And we need even more stories than we had before.
And the stories, Bryan, can be done probably again well, who knows what the General Assembly will do, but it's not out of the question that they might continue, because it's so much easier to get witnesses if we do it virtually.
Yeah, and I think there's 2 points there. One, I mean, I personally never loved driving the hour and a half to Richmond to sit thinking a bill was going to be called for 6 hours and then having it not called and then have to drive back and drive down another day. That doesn't work for people, with a job or, and anybody really. So hopefully they're going to continue virtual testimony, which let people do it from their home, from their cars, to call in. But I think most legislators will tell you that the testimony down in Richmond during the session, which starts in January every year, is important. But by then it's almost too late to change someone's mind. Where people really get educated, where the legislators really get educated about these issues are summertime and into the early fall. Tough in an election year, but depending who your legislator is, they're always willing to make time to talk to people. So I would encourage everyone to look up who their state representative, the member of the House Delegates is, and their senator. There's lots of them in Fairfax and in Northern Virginia. So make sure you pop in the address so you can Google it and find out who it is and talk to them about these issues. Talk to them about changes you want to see in the criminal system, or just talk to them about your experience as someone who is or is close to a returning citizen. I think they're especially attuned to those issues right now, and to understand from your perspective how the criminal legal system works is very different, because for most of human history, right, they've heard it from police officers and prosecutors. Now they're starting to listen to people like me who are lawyers or advocates. But the last piece of the puzzle, the most important piece, is people who've lived through being accused of a crime or being convicted of a crime and being sentenced. That's the last piece here that's going to move hearts, not just minds, which I think is where we're at. We got people's minds, but we need their hearts to change. So contact them, schedule a meeting. You're going to be able to get a half hour to tell them your story and pitch some of these changes. And, McGennis or I, or a lot of people, are happy to give you some policy reasons at the end to throw in, but I don't even think you need to get that complicated. Just tell your story.
Right. And Kelly, you've been telling your story in a very effective way. I mean, you didn't have any training to do that, right?
No, other than heredity. We seem to have a gift of gab, but no, really, it has been, there are so many people with open minds. I mean, people like McGennis, people like Bryan, people like the Justice Initiative that I work with. There's so many people that are non-judgmental when it comes to what I have to say about my past. And it's like Bryan said, it's eye-opening and it touches people's hearts. It's a lot of times decisions are made with lack of understanding. And so hearing someone's personal experience is what makes all the difference. And for me, I can tell you, as a recovering addict, in the past, a lot of my failures and relapses came from trying to leave my past in the past. So for me, like you asked me earlier, what this means to me, and how this is helping me. It's certainly a healing process. I don't have to leave the past behind, and I can be completely honest about it in so many venues. And people are responsive and people are appreciative of it. And then that allows them a chance to open up about a family member that they know, a coworker they know that's struggling or has struggled in the past. And it's giving people insight. It's giving people understanding. Sometimes I can explain something different and they're not hearing it with biased ears if it's about a family member, so it really is, the more voices that speak, the better that the country's going to hear, so.
Kelly, would one of the things that you would talk about, I imagine, be about expungement and sealing of records, given the difficulties it poses for future employment and other things?
For sure. I mean, that's one of the main reasons. I mean, I'm completely content with my current position within the job field that I'm in. But the fact that I do have such an extensive record, or even if I only had one felony on my record, it really doesn't matter. That's one thing that does hold me back from pursuing other goals and other dreams career-wise that I have, is because I'm constantly fearful, not that I'm going to have to explain my past, but that my past is absolutely going to eliminate me from even being considered for a position. So not that I don't have the skill set to fulfill the job. I just, my background is what eliminates me from even being considered. So the expungement would be a huge step in motivating me to try other things and to fulfill other goals that I have.
And Bryan, the whole expungement discussion, there were bills all over the place, some a lot more attractive than the ones that were passed. I mean, is there still going to be stuff in the pipeline that we can be working for?
This was a very politically difficult issue in the General Assembly, I think is the nicest way to put it. A lot of people had a lot of different feelings about a lot of different parts of this bill. And no one had the full picture, because there was stuff about private companies. What can they do with information versus the government? How far should it go? What type of sealing or expunge? There's so many moving parts, and it's such a complex issue. And they had a short session this year, so doing it all then was something that was admittedly very complicated. It's a lot of public policy stuff. But because of that, I think what this was a start. It was, this is the minimum that we should be doing. And the good thing about it is we can always expand it, because it's better to expand it, I think the theory goes, than contract it. Which I may agree with in this limited context, but there's still a lot of room to improve this. And just because it's the law doesn't mean it needs to stay the law, and it's not going to go into effect for a few years. So even before it goes into effect, there's still more time to improve it. I'll also say that the legislators who have talked about it, I keep saying, 2024, but that's the outside date. It's really a question of money. So depending on the economic situation next year, there may be more opportunity to speed this up. If I could follow up with one other thing Kelly was saying that just made me think of it. When I'm encouraging everyone to come to these spaces, especially if you're a returning citizen directly impacted, when you come to the advocacy space, please, please, please speak up. I think a lot of people, I'm a white guy lawyer, right? So I roll in and I start talking, and I will talk about anything because that's what, white guys do. We'll talk opinionated about anything in space. And I try not to do that, but that's what you're going to get with, policy people, lawyers, stuff like that who are in the room, even if we're well meaning. So if you're in the space with someone like me, I'll throw out and say, and what I'm saying doesn't make sense given your experience, throw it out and be like, that's not my experience. That doesn't sound right to me. Or, what actually would help me or some people I know is this, not the thing you're talking about. Don't be afraid to, your lived experience is at least as good and probably better than all the papers and theory and statistics anyone can ever have. So there may not be 100% agreement, but I think we're luckily moving to a time where everyone needs to be listening to the real experts who have lived experience. So please, please, please speak up or tell us we're morons when people like me start talking.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure even in the few years that you've been doing this, and in the few years I've been watching it, is that there really is, as you say, I mean, people really do want to hear from the people who are affected. I mean, there really is an awareness of how important it is to actually hear from the true stakeholders.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a really incredible change. When we started doing this, you might be able to get away with the right type of person talking, depending what they look like, what they were charged with, what their record was. And I think now we're starting to get to a point where there are more people who consider everyone a human being and everyone's experience valuable and want to learn why people end up in a certain situation. And once we learn why, that's when we can start actually to think about it instead of just reacting to everything once it already happened, which is obviously not useful because we've been doing that for at least since 1960s and it hasn't worked.
And one of the things that I noticed when I tuned in to watch some of the hearings last year is that there are some people who just want to make sure that somebody who's committed an offense is punished. It's about punishment. And now it seems like there's some change going on where a lot of legislators too are interested in restorative justice kinds of things and education and treatment. Like Kelly, I know you can speak to this, the importance of education and treatment.
Sure, absolutely. And really the alternative, it's one thing. I'm not saying that I wasn't guilty of any of the crimes I committed. I certainly was. But never once did being incarcerated for a period of time ever benefit me once I was released. So really that's what is, fine. I deserved to be punished for the crimes that I committed. Absolutely. But what's a better way to allow me not to commit the same offenses in the future? Really just alternatives. We're not saying we don't deserve to be punished. I'm not saying I never committed the crime. I'm just saying what's a way for everybody to come out better in the end, so.
And alternatives are being offered, right, Bryan, to the legislators, and they seem a little bit more open.
Yeah, and I think legislators on all sides are open to, because I think everyone's, it's an urban problem, it's a rural problem, it's a suburban problem, especially with drug issues over the past several years. I think it's brought everything a little bit closer to home for everybody. So I think people are figuring out like, wow, maybe the prisons aren't the major mental health care provider we should be giving. Or maybe the prisons are not, as we know, prisons aren't even places where you don't use drugs. There's, we've seen recently, and it's not family members who are bringing in drugs. If everyone read that report in the Virginia Mercury this week, that everyone knew staff members bring in drugs to prisons. Mm-hmm. So it's not a place to get clean, even though that's what the theory is, right? So we know the theory is broken. So I think there's been a big expansion, other laws saying you can do deferred dispositions on any type of charge, the idea of, Marcus alerts and trying to route people directly into mental health treatment or substance abuse treatment instead of bringing them into the criminal legal system at all. They're starting to gain traction. Putting a plug, I think some things we're going to be working on include things like why does simple drug possession need to be a felony? I think is an interesting question everyone needs to answer. Why can't it just be a misdemeanor if it needs to be a crime at all? So I think people are going to be looking into those treatment alternatives, and those need to be done correctly too. And we need to think about how we do them and how we coerce people to doing them. And there's lots of issues, but one step at a time that we can have these conversations, which we didn't used to be able to have.
So it looks as though we're kind of wrapping up everything we intended to say. We just want to make sure there aren't questions out there people would like to throw in the Q&A. And I guess what I come away with is there's been a lot of changes and there's got to be more. We got to do it bigger and better. Mm-hmm. And we need returning citizens to help us.
Yep, absolutely. We may be out of the Stone Age, but we only made it to the Bronze. So it's been 400 years of bad stuff. We need to, do a lot more.
Yeah,
right. So should we consider it a wrap, Vince? What do you think?
Where's the great narrator?
I'm here. I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think, yeah, thank you so much. I think if anybody has any final questions that they wanted to put in the chat, more than welcome. We still have a little bit of time left, but I guess just a question for you all, just some kind of final thoughts from just the sessions as you've seen it, and just kind of pathways moving forward, and just final thoughts for people. So McGennis, I'd love to start with you and then move on.
Sure. I've gotten really involved in the restorative justice movement. I can't tell you how exciting it is. It's about finding ways to alternatives. It's alternatives to punishment, and looking at education and treatment, and stepping away from this idea of an eye for an eye. So whenever you hear anything about restorative justice, look into that. It's something that's really evolving, and it's really, really important.
I guess I'll jump in. What I just really want to emphasize is it's important for everybody just to put one foot in front of the other, whether you're a returning citizen, whether you're an advocate for those of us who are returning citizens. It's just to continue being open-minded, to continue to be honest, and really to be willing. I mean, that's just all I can say from my point of view. It's just really about willing to put in the work and effort. And I think that's true for anyone who's involved. It's work, it's a lot of effort, and it's rewarding. It certainly is rewarding.
I think what I'll say is, when I started doing this type of work generally 10, 12 years ago, everyone would say Virginia's the last place that's going to make any changes. That was true for everything. Virginia will be the 48th state. It'll be Mississippi and Alabama after us. And I think in some ways that history has led us to have our imagination even shorter of what we might be able to do if everyone works together. So I think don't let the past hold us back. If there's some changes we can make, that's in Fairfax County, in Northern Virginia, in the state. Lots of good has happened in the past decade, things that we never thought were possible. So let's imagine that better world and figure out how we can work to make it there.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much to all of you for giving of your time. We really appreciate it. And thank you for everybody who stayed on with us and watched. This was a fantastic session. And so thank you for all your questions. Just a reminder, we have one final panel this Thursday from noon to 1:15 Eastern. So please come back and join us as we kind of wrap up this series. Thank you so much for just being with us throughout this entire process. We hope you've learned a lot, and we hope to wrap it up with a bang with our panel of returning citizens on Thursday. So we're looking forward to it. Thank you again to the panelists, and then I hope to talk to you all soon.
Thank you, Vince.
Thank you.